My backyard was my sanctuary, until my new neighbor decided to take a chainsaw to my peace. He had no idea he was about to challenge the very law I swore to uphold. My Saturday mornings were sacred. They were my one little slice of peace in a life that was often anything but. No early morning alarms, no court filings, no staring down men who thought the law was merely a suggestion. Just me, a hot cup of coffee, and my garden. I'd worked my whole life to afford this little house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. I'd painted the shutters myself, planted the hydrangeas that were just now starting to bloom in vibrant blues and purples, and I'd paid a small fortune for the beautiful 6-foot cedar privacy fence that wrapped around my backyard. That fence wasn't just wood and nails, it was my fortress of solitude. It was the physical boundary between my demanding, often brutal professional life and my tranquil personal one. That tranquility shattered the day Officer Miller moved in next door. I knew he was a cop before I even met him. You could just tell. The telltale Blue Lives Matter flag went up on his porch within an hour of the moving truck arriving, right next to a giant American flag that was technically too big for the pole. He was loud, had a booming laugh that felt more like a performance than genuine joy, and walked with the kind of swagger that said he owned not just his property, but the whole block. Our first interaction set the tone. I was trimming my rose bushes when he stomped over, a beer in his hand at 10 a.m. "Morning, sweetheart," he boomed, not even looking at me, but instead eyeing my fence. "Mighty fine fence you got there. A little close to the property line, though, isn't it?" He winked as if sharing a joke. I just smiled politely. "Good morning, I'm Camilla." "And no, it's not. I had a survey done before it was installed. It's 6 inches inside my line, to be exact." His smile tightened. He wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by me, apparently. He just grunted, took a long swig of his beer, and said, "Well, we'll see about that." Over the next few weeks, the microaggressions piled up. His German Shepherd was constantly let out to do its business on my front lawn. His music, always some kind of grating butt rock, would rattle my windows at all hours. He'd park his massive pickup truck so it blocked half of my driveway. I tried to handle it like a good neighbor. I spoke to him calmly, even left a polite note once. Each time he'd just smirk and say something like, "Relax, sweetheart. It's a neighborhood, not a library." He saw me as a nuisance, an obstacle to his absolute reign over his little suburban kingdom. He had no idea who I was, and I preferred it that way. In my line of work, anonymity at home is a blessing. The final straw came on a bright, sunny afternoon. I was just getting home from a particularly grueling day at the office, already dreaming of a glass of wine and the quiet hum of my backyard. But as I pulled into my driveway, a different sound filled the air, a high-pitched, angry, mechanical roar. My blood ran cold. It was the sound of a chainsaw. I got out of my car and followed the noise, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it. It was him, Officer Miller. He was wearing safety goggles and a grin of pure malicious satisfaction, and he was taking a chainsaw to my fence, not trimming a branch that hung over, not fixing a loose board. He was systematically destroying it, cutting a huge, jagged section right out of the middle. Sawdust flew everywhere, coating my prize-winning hydrangeas in a layer of wooden snow. He was a solid 2 panels in, carving up the beautiful cedar planks I'd paid so much for, the symbol of my peace, turning it into a pile of splintered debris. I stood there for a second, completely stunned into silence. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He saw me, and instead of stopping, he switched off the chainsaw and leaned against the mangled remains of my fence, wiping sweat from his brow. "Afternoon, Camilla," he said, his voice dripping with condescending triumph. "Just doing a little property line correction. Figured I'd save you the trouble." I found my voice, and it was colder than I expected. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Like I said, this fence was over the line. I'm just claiming what's mine. You people always try to take a little extra, don't you?" "You people." There it was. The quiet part said out loud. The fury that had been simmering for weeks erupted inside me, but on the outside I became perfectly still. My professional instincts took over. The prosecutor and me stepped forward, while the shocked homeowner took a seat. I looked at the mangled fence, the running chainsaw at his feet, and his smug, arrogant face. He thought this was over. He thought because he had a badge and I was just some woman. His version of events was the only one that mattered. I slowly pulled my phone out of my purse, my movements deliberate. He scoffed. "What are you going to do, sweetheart? Call the cops?" I didn't even blink. I unlocked my phone, held his gaze, and said in a voice as sharp and clear as breaking glass, "Yes, I am." I pressed the call button, and as the dispatcher's voice came on the line, I watched the smirk on Officer Miller's face begin to flicker, a hint of confusion in his eyes. He had absolutely no idea who he had just declared war on. I held the phone to my ear, calmly giving the dispatcher my address and a brief, factual summary. An adult male is actively destroying my property with a chainsaw. I made sure to use the word chainsaw twice. It's a word that gets attention. Across the yard, Miller's smugness had morphed into disbelief, then into a flicker of anger. He clearly thought I was bluffing, or that even if I did call, nothing would happen. He crossed his thick arms over his chest, the picture of aggrieved masculinity. "You're making a big mistake," he growled, trying to sound intimidating. I just held his gaze, silent, until the distant wail of a siren grew closer. 2 officers arrived in a single cruiser. They were young, one looking barely out of the academy. As they stepped onto my lawn, Miller's entire demeanor changed. He transformed from my belligerent neighbor into their brother in arms. He uncrossed his arms, put on a weary, put-upon smile, and met them halfway. "Hey, fellas, thanks for coming. Sorry to drag you out for this." He jerked a thumb in my direction. "My new neighbor here is a little excitable." The older of the 2 officers, whose name tag read Sutton, nodded at Miller, and then gave me a once-over that lingered just a little too long. It was a look I was intimately familiar with, a quick dismissive appraisal that catalogued my race and gender, and filed me away as unreliable narrator. "Ma'am," he said, his tone already tired, "what seems to be the problem here?" "The problem," I said, my voice steady, "is that this man," I pointed directly at Miller, "has come onto my property and destroyed my fence with this chainsaw." I gestured to the mangled cedar and the weapon sitting on the grass. Miller let out a theatrical sigh. "Officer, her fence was 3 feet onto my property. I have the survey maps to prove it. I tried to talk to her about it civilly, but she wouldn't listen. I was just taking back what's mine." It was a bald-faced lie, but he said it with the effortless confidence of a man used to being believed. Sutton turned back to me, his expression softening into one of condescending patience. "Ma'am, property line disputes are really a civil matter. You'll have to take that up with the city or in small claims court. We can't get involved." "This isn't a dispute," I stated, clipping my words. "This is destruction of property. That fence is valued at over $5,000. Under State Penal Code 594, destruction of property over $400 in value is a felony. He did not ask for my permission. He is on my land, and he used a weapon to do it. You need to arrest him." Both officers blinked. They weren't expecting me to cite the penal code. The younger one shuffled his feet nervously. Sutton, however, seemed annoyed. He saw it not as a statement of fact, but as a challenge to his authority. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hardening, "I'm not going to arrest another police officer based on a he said, she said civil dispute. Officer Miller here says he tried to talk to you. Maybe there was a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Miller chimed in, seeing his advantage. "She's just being hysterical." That was it. That was the moment I knew I had given them every opportunity to do their jobs correctly. They had seen the evidence with their own eyes, the destroyed fence, the chainsaw, the sawdust covering my hydrangeas, and had chosen to believe the lie from their colleague over the truth from me. They had chosen the blue line over the law they were sworn to uphold. My patience, which had been stretched thin for weeks, finally snapped, but it wasn't an emotional break. It was a cold, precise fracture. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, pulling my professional ID from my wallet. I held it up for them to see. The gold shield of the district attorney's office gleamed in the afternoon sun. Officer Sutton's eyes widened as he read the text. The younger officer looked like he might actually be sick. Miller, who was standing behind them with a triumphant smirk, hadn't seen it yet. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice dropping to the low, authoritative tone I used in the courtroom. "My name is Camilla Rowe. I am a senior deputy district attorney for this county. You are currently standing at an active crime scene where a felony has just been committed. The suspect is standing right behind you." I looked past them, locking eyes with Miller, whose face had gone completely white. "And you, Officer Sutton, have just informed a prosecutor, to her face, that you have no intention of enforcing the law. So I'm going to make a suggestion. You are going to get on your radio, right now, and you are going to request your immediate supervisor to this scene. And while you do that, I'll be placing a call to my boss, District Attorney Evans. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear all about this civil dispute." The change that came over the scene was instantaneous and absolute. It was like flipping a master switch. Officer Sutton's condescending demeanor evaporated, replaced by a pale, clammy panic. He fumbled for his radio, his hands suddenly clumsy. "Ma'am, prosecutor, we didn't realize," he stammered, his eyes darting between my ID and my face as if he couldn't reconcile the two. The younger officer just stood there, frozen, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. But my focus was entirely on Miller. The swagger, the arrogance, the smug certainty, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a man who looked small and pathetic, standing next to the wreckage he'd created. The color had drained from his face. He finally understood. I wasn't just the quiet black woman next door he could bully and dismiss. I was the law. I was the person who signed the warrants, who filed the charges, who stood in front of a judge and methodically dismantled men like him for a living. His world, built on the assumption of his own authority and my powerlessness, had just been turned upside down. While Sutton was anxiously speaking into his radio, I made my call. I kept it brief. "Frank," I said when my boss picked up, "it's Camilla. I'm at my home address. I've just been the victim of a felony, and the responding officers are refusing to take a report because the suspect is one of their own. I need you to send an investigator from our office. Now." There was a moment of silence, then a firm, "I'm on my way." Within 15 minutes, my quiet suburban street looked like a major crime scene. A police sergeant Sutton's supervisor arrived, his expression grim. He took one look at my ID, the demolished fence, and the faces of his officers, and immediately began damage control. He sent the two initial officers back to their cruiser with a sharp command to "stay put and write your damn reports." He then approached Miller, who was now leaning against his own house, looking utterly defeated. The conversation was short and ended with the sergeant taking the chainsaw and placing it in an evidence bag himself. Then Frank Evans, the district attorney, pulled up in his black sedan, along with our top investigator, a retired detective named Diaz. Frank was a formidable man, and he looked furious. He surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on the destroyed fence, and then came straight to me. "Camilla, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Frank. Just angry," I said. He nodded, then turned his attention to the sergeant. The power dynamic on the street had completely inverted. The police were no longer in charge. My office was. Diaz started taking photos, measuring the distance from the fence line to the property markers I pointed out, the ones from the official survey, still clearly visible. The sergeant was profusely apologetic, promising a full and thorough investigation. I watched them all work, feeling a cold sense of satisfaction. Miller had tried to use his power, his badge, to intimidate and dominate me. He assumed the system would protect him, that his word would always be worth more than mine, and he would have been right if I had been anyone else. That was the truly infuriating part. How many times had he, and men like him, gotten away with it? How many people had been dismissed as hysterical or excitable when they were simply trying to defend their rights? Miller was placed on administrative leave that same day. The investigation, spearheaded by our office to avoid any conflict of interest, was swift. With my testimony, the photographic evidence, the survey maps, and the panicked contradictory reports from the first two officers, The case was airtight. Miller was charged with felony vandalism and, to my deep satisfaction, misuse of authority. His career was over. Faced with the mountain of evidence, he pled guilty to the felony charge to avoid a trial and almost certain jail time. The judge ordered him to pay for the entire fence to be replaced, plus additional damages for my hydrangeas. He was also given a restraining order, and a for sale sign went up in his yard less than a week later. The following Saturday morning, I was back in my fortress of solitude. The new cedar fence was already being installed, the scent of fresh-cut wood filling the air. It looked exactly like the old one strong, beautiful, and standing firmly, unequivocally, on my side of the line. I sat in my garden chair, a hot cup of coffee in my hands, and watched the workers. My peace had been shattered, but I had put it back together, stronger than before. Officer Miller had thought my fence was a boundary he could tear down at will. He learned the hard way that the most formidable walls aren't made of wood. They're made of the law, and in my yard, I was the one who enforced it.